Hey guys, it's Steph. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to use Vue and Tailwind to recreate the Twitter homepage. Here's a little preview of how it's going to look. It's going to be completely responsive, and you'll be able to make your own little tweets. So if you're interested, make sure you keep watching, like and subscribe to my channel. I'll also be posting this code on GitHub, so if you want to download it and follow along, you're more than welcome to. All right, so I've already got a blank project all set up. If I go to my Tailwind config.js file, I've got all the colors I'm going to be using. I just Googled Twitter branding guidelines and it was like the first thing to pop up, all the colors you need. So let's get started. The outermost div is going to be flex because we have those three different sections side by side. So I'll go ahead and say flex. I also want to put a container in. I'll make the height the entire length of the screen and width full. I'll go ahead and start the side nav bar. So we can add the div, the outermost div for the side nav bar. And I'm going to give it a width of 1/5, a border on the right hand side, and we'll give our lightest shade of gray for that, or our second lightest. I'll give it some padding. So padding X, I'll do 8 because there's quite a bit, but in the Y direction, there's only a tiny bit of padding, so I'll go with 2. So the first thing we have in the side nav bar is that button with the Twitter logo. So I'm going to put a button here. It's round, but it only has a background color on hover, so let's give it a height and width of 12. We'll say on hover, background is light blue. We'll say text is 3XL and it's blue. All right, and then on the inside, I'm just going to use an icon from Font Awesome, which is the Twitter logo. So let's take a look at that. All right, it looks good, but I forgot to round it. So let's go back to this button and say rounded full. So now we can move on to all of these buttons. Since they all have the exact same styling and there's so many of them, I'm going to use a dictionary to make them. It's just going to make life a bit simpler. So underneath the button we just made, let's add another div, and this is going to house all those buttons. And then within that div, we'll go ahead and say button. All right. So this button is going to have an icon next to a title. So we'll go ahead and flex it and say items center. And then let's give it some padding Y 2 and padding X 4. We'll adjust that once we see how it is. And when you hover over these buttons, it once again has that light blue background color. So let's say hover, background, light blue, and it's a pill shape. So we'll go rounded, full. Then lastly, it doesn't take up the entire width of the nav bar, only as much as the letters take up. So let's go ahead and say margin right auto. And then within this button, we're going to have an icon and we're going to have the title. So I'll give it a P tag. All right, so to save time, I went ahead and just created this dictionary. I called it tabs, and it has an icon, a title, and an ID for every button that we'll be making. So we can go ahead and go up to the button we just created and say V4, and we'll just say tab in tabs. Then this icon, we're gonna use some JavaScript, so we gotta set up our Vue syntax, and we'll say tab.icon. And then for this P tag, we'll say tab.title. We'll style the icon, we'll say text 2XL, margin right 4, and then for the title, let's say text large and font semi-bold. Buttons center things by default, so we'll have to also go up and say text left to each of these. And then in the button, let's say hover text blue. All right, so let's take a look at what we've done. And it's looking pretty good. We definitely need to put some spacing between these. So we can go to this button and say margin bottom 3. And that already looks so much better. So the next thing we need to work on, when you click the button, we want the text to turn blue. And let's get rid of that outline. So to get rid of the outline, we just say focus, outline, none. And then for the color change on click, we're going to use these IDs that I put in the dictionary. So by default, let's have the ID start off as home. And then up in this button, we can say at click, ID will be set to tab.id. And then in the styling, let's use our view syntax so that we can write JavaScript within this string. And we will just say if ID is equal to tab.id, then text will be blue. Otherwise, don't do anything. So let's see if that worked. And now we can see that it did. So the next thing we need to do is add that long pill-shaped blue button that says tweet at the very bottom of this. So on the outside of that div we just created with all of those buttons, we'll go ahead and make another button. This one will say text white, background blue, say rounded, full, and font semi-bold. Within it, we're just going to say tweet. And we're going to get in the habit of doing this to every button in this project. Just focus, outline, none. So let's see how that turned out. It looks really silly because I forgot to put padding on it. And it did not take up the full width. So let's say with full and padding 3. That might be a little too much padding. It looks fine. The very last touch I'm going to do is on hover. Let's make our background our dark blue color. So we're almost done with this side nav section. The very last thing we're going to do is add that drop-down menu. I think the best way for us to do this would be to put all of these buttons that we just made inside their own separate div. So let's go ahead and do that. Fix the tabs. And then I'm just going to say flex, flex column, justify between. Oops, I meant to put that. So I put this styling on the wrong div. That should be on the div above this one. So up here. And then we will add another div, and this is going to contain the drop-down menu. So within this div, we're going to have another button. And this button has 3 sections. It's going to have our profile picture, and then our Twitter name and handle, and then a drop-down icon. So we're going to want to say flex items center. And then within it, we'll have our profile picture, which I labeled mine just profile.png. And then we've got to style it. Let's say width 12, height 12, rounded, full. In the actual Twitter app, they don't put a border around the images, but the picture I have is the only picture I had on my laptop of myself, and it has a transparent background. So I'm going to put a border just so we can see it's rounded, but I don't recommend doing this. All right. So next, let's do a div, and this is going to have our Twitter name and our Twitter handle in it. Let's say margin left 64, and then we'll have 2 p tags within here. Text small, font bold, text. And then we'll have another p tag. This time it won't be bold. So the bolded one is going to just be our name, and then below that is our Twitter handle. And the very last thing we have will be an icon. All right, so we got our caret down. Let's just say margin left auto, text large. Let's take a look at it. Okay, it's coming along. We've got to fix this caret. The reason the margin left auto didn't do anything is because we didn't say with full. So we've got to go up here and say with full, and we might even have to go to this outermost div and just say with full. And there we go. So one edit I want to make, I'm going to say leading tight, and I'll say that to both of these. And then on hover, this button has a light blue background. Actually, I think it's a light gray background. So let's say hover background lightest. Let's also say rounded full, and let's give it some padding. Let's try padding too. All right, that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna make my profile picture a little bit smaller. Down here, let's make it 10 by 10. And then we've gotta make our background color blue on hover. So here we say background lightest, let's change it to light blue. And then we've got to get in the habit of doing this, focus, outline, none. So now let's get the drop down in place. We'll have a separate div for this, but still within the div housing that button we just made. It's going to be absolute. Let's say bottom 0, right 0. We got to make sure this outermost div has the relative class so it doesn't go all crazy. And then let's give this div a width of 64. We'll say rounded large, shadow medium, and border lightest. Okay, so within this dropdown, we're going to have 3 buttons. The first one's going to be similar to the button that we made up here. So I'm actually just going to copy and paste that into this dropdown. I forgot to give this dropdown a background color white. Let's take a look at the Twitter one so we can see what we're working with here. All right, so the only difference is that instead of the caret down icon, we're going to have a check icon. So let's go here and say fastfa check. I'm going to take away the text large, and I'm going to switch it with text blue. I'm going to give this a margin bottom. Let's try 16. That's good. And then instead of right 0, let's try left 0. That's better. All right, so the button we copy and pasted in. On hover, we have that pill-shaped light blue background. Let's take away the rounded full, so it's just a rectangle. And instead of light blue, let's do our lightest shade of gray. Now we're gonna add another button. Let's say with full, text left. On hover, we want our background to be lightest. We'll go ahead and give it a border top and border lighter. So within this, it's going to say add an existing account. let's try padding 3. All right, it's looking pretty good. I want to go up to this button that we already did and add padding 3 to that as well. And then to this lower button, I'll say text small. And then I'm just going to copy and paste it to make our next button. This one is going to say log out at @sassyf. All right, so let's take a look at our drop-down menu. It's looking pretty decent. Let's give it some really basic functionality just so we can close out of it. What I'm gonna do is go up to our first button we made with our profile picture, and I'm gonna say @click, drop-down is true. And then to keep it really simple, all of these buttons within the drop-down menu, I'm just going to say @click, drop-down becomes false. And I'll do that for all 3 of these buttons. Then up in the div housing the buttons in the drop-down menu, let's say v-if drop-down is true. And then down in our data, by default, we want drop-down to be false. So let's give it a try. We don't see anything, we click it, and it works. So we've got to get our focus outline none for these 2 buttons. So let's go ahead and put focus outline none on these buttons. Okay, so before we move on to the next section, we want to make this responsive. The way we're going to do that is where we have width 1/5. Let's say as long as it's a large screen, width is 1/5. Otherwise, we're not going to specify the width. This padding X, let's say if the screen is large, it's padding X8. Otherwise, let's just do padding X2. When we go down to this tweet button, we only want width to be full if the screen is large. If it's a medium size or smaller, let's say width is 12. Let's also say height is 12, which means if the screen is large, height will just be auto. Then I'm going to put this tweet within a p tag. And I'm going to say it's hidden. Unless the screen is large, then it will be block. Okay, so we're going to add an icon. And we'll say, if the screen size is large, then it's hidden. So for our drop-down menu, we want to say only if the screen is large with full. We will make everything disappear except for our profile picture if the screen is small. So right here we will say hidden, but if it's large, it can be a block. And the same thing down here. Okay. So it looks like something happened with the padding in our side nav bar. Here, we want to say large, and let's bring this down actually to 6. If we go to the tabs where we have that dictionary, in the p tag, let's say hidden, unless the screen is large, in which case it's block. So now if we look, we've got this really nice collapsible side nav bar. So now we can move on to the next section. So looking at the Twitter homepage, I'm going to get this tweet section in place and then skip over to the trending section. So let's find where this side nav div ends. And outside of that, we'll create our tweet section. And then we will also create our trending section. So for a tweet section, I'm going to give it a width of 1/2 and a height full. I'm going to do the same for trending, but instead of 1/2, I'm going to say width 1/3 height full. And then I'll give it a border left. The border color is going to be our lighter shade. I spelled border wrong. Okay, so that looks good. Now we can start working on filling in this trending section. The first thing I'm going to do is add padding Y2, padding X 6, since that's what we did on our side nav bar. Let's be consistent. Now this section is going to be scrollable, so let's say overflow Y scroll. And we're going to put an absolute child in here, so let's make this outermost div relative. Within this, we're going to put an input. We'll make it rounded, full, width full. Start off with padding 2. Background, lighter. And we'll give it a placeholder. So I'm just getting my magnifying icon and put it below that input. I'm going to make this absolute. We're going to say left 0, top 0. Then we're going to need some margin top and left. Let's try margin top 5, margin left 12. We can always adjust those. Text small. Then if we go up to our input, let's clear some room on the left-hand side. So we'll say padding left 10. I'm going to make our text small in the input. And then in the icon, let's say text light. Awesome. I think padding left, we can use a little less than 10. Let's go with 8 up in this input. Oops, I meant to say a little more, 12. And that looks perfect. So let's move on to this trends for you section. Now in this section, I'm going to once again use a dictionary just so we don't have to recreate each of these buttons, similar to how we did over here. So just to speed things up, I already added the dictionary we're going to use. I called it trending. We have our top content, our title, and our bottom content. So if we scroll back up to our trending section, underneath the input we just added, let's create another div. And let's style it. I'm going to say with full, rounded, large, background, lightest, padding 3. Then within that, we're going to have another div. This is going to have our header and the cog icon. So let's say class, flex, items center, and justify between. Where we have this padding 3 up here, let's actually delete that and put the padding 3 on this new div we just made within it. And then we'll have our header and an icon. So the header says trends for you. We'll say text large and font bold. And then let's get our cog icon that goes on the right-hand side. For this icon, we'll say text large and text blue. So now, underneath this div, let's create a button. This button is going to have a width full. We'll flex it, justify between. On hover, we want the background to be our lighter color. Let's give it a padding 3. So within this button, we're going to have a div containing our main content, and then we'll have an icon. So we'll have 3 p tags. This first one, we'll just say text small. text left, because the button is going to try to center this, and leading tight. The content is going to be trend.top. And I forgot to do this. We have to go up to this button and we'll say v4 trend in trends. Okay. So now let's copy this and paste it. And instead of text small, let's delete that and say font bold. And instead of trend top, we'll say trend.title. And then once again, we'll copy that and paste it. I'm going to take that font bold away. And I will say trend.bottom. Now outside of the div housing those three p tags, we need to get our caret down icon and just paste it right below that div. And I'm going to say text large. Okay, so up here I said trend in trends, but I called it trending. So let's fix that. To this button, let's say border top, border lighter. The top text, we'll say text dark. We'll do the same thing to the bottom text and to our icon. So to finish this card off, let's add another button. We are going to once again say padding 3 with full. And on hover, our background will be our lighter shade of gray. And text left. Then I'm just going to say show more. So we're going to make that text blue. And lastly, let's say border top, border lighter. So we've got our trends free section. So if we look at the Twitter page, scroll down to who to follow. It's kind of a mixture between this card we just made and our profile down here. So I'm going to copy this card, and within the buttons, I'm just going to paste what we did over here and switch the icon to a follow button. All right. So I'm going to copy this entire card. And instead of trends for you, it's going to say who to follow. And there's no icon, so let's delete that icon and delete the flex item center justify between. We do not need that anymore. We'll delete the v4 trend in trending and all the content within this button. So if we go up to our drop-down button, let's copy and paste that, just the content within it. Into this button. Let's take away the justify between. And instead of having an icon here, we're going to have a button. This button is going to say follow. And let's say text small, text blue. Padding Y, let's just say 2, padding X 4, rounded, full, border 2, border blue. Let's take the padding Y down to 1. I'm going to increase the size of the profile picture to 12 by 12. And then we've got to give this button a margin left auto. So just to speed things up, I've once again already added the dictionary we're going to use. I called it friends, and we have their profile picture, their name, and their Twitter handle. I just put the first 3 celebrities to pop in my head. So let's go back up to this button, and we'll say v4 friend in friends. So here, instead of having my profile picture, we will use some JavaScript and say friend.src. Same thing down here. Instead of my name, let's do friend.name. And lastly, friend.handle. So now if we take a look, we should see all of our who to follow options. Before we move on, let's just give some margin to these two cards. So up here, I'm going to say margin Y4. Much better. Another thing is you can see when we scroll, the whole page scrolls, which we want this nav bar to stay fixed. And that's because I misspelled overflow up here. So if I fix that, it now works. Now, before going on to this tweet section, we can see that when we get into smaller screens, the trending section goes away. So let's go up to this trending section and we'll say medium block, otherwise hidden. So now if we go to our Twitter page, when we make the screen small, it disappears. So let's move on to this tweet section. We're going to scroll up here. We labeled it tweets. This is again going to be a scrollable section. So let's say overflow y scroll. Make sure you spell it correctly, at myself. And then we're going to add a div. Now this is going to have our header. It says home and it's got that sparkle icon. So let's say padding X 5, padding Y 3, border bottom, border lighter. We're going to flex it, items center, and I typed out and justify between. Now we're going to add our header, which just says home. We'll make this text extra large and font bold. And then we'll get our sparkle icon. Copy that icon and we'll paste it in. Let's say text extra large, text blue for this icon. And then we can take a look at that. All right. So next is this section for us to type a tweet. We've got our profile picture, a text area, some icons, and the button to tweet, and the super thick border. So let's make another div. We're going to give it the same padding as above, so padding X5 and padding Y3. We'll say border bottom, and let's make it really thick, so we'll make it 8. And the color will still be our lighter shade of gray. Let's say flex. So within this, I'm going to have a div containing my profile picture, and then I'm going to have the form with our input and button. So I'll put my image within here. The src is just profile.png. Make sure I spell that right. And then we'll say width 12, height 12, rounded full. Again, the border just because of the stupid picture I have. All right, so for this form, let's say width full, padding X4, and let's make it relative because we will have an absolute child. Then the first thing we have in here is a text area. The placeholder is going to say, what's up? let's just give this text area a width full and focus outline none. Below the text area, let's create another div, and this is where all those icons are going to go. So let's make these icons text large, text blue, margin x6. If we go to this outer div housing the icons, we should say flex and items center. Now I'm going to fill in all of these icons. So I've added all of the icons with the exact same styling. Let's take a look at how that came out. So let's get rid of the margin X and change it just to margin right. And instead of 6, let's do 4. Next, we can add our button. So we'll go ahead and just make a button. Let's say height 10, padding X 4, text white, font semi-bold, background blue. On hover, we want that background to be our dark blue. And focus outline none. Within this button, it's just going to say tweet. And I forgot to say rounded full. So this button is going to be absolute so that it can be next to our icons, but still within the form. So let's go ahead and say absolute. We'll say bottom 0 and right 0. Lastly, let's go back to our text area and let's say margin top 3 so it lines up with our profile image, and padding bottom 3 as well. So let's go back to the Twitter page and take a look at a tweet. So we've got the profile picture, name, handle, time pass, and an icon over here, the actual tweet, and then some icons. And on hover, we've got a darker background. So outside of this form, actually outside of this entire div, let's create a new div. We will say width full. Let's do padding 4, border bottom. On hover, we'll make the background our lighter shade of gray, and let's flex it. So our very first thing, once again, is the profile picture. We're going to have to say flex none for this, just so it doesn't squash the profile picture. And let's also give it margin right 4, because we are going to need that in the future. And then we'll put our image. Let's give it height 12, width 12, rounded, full, and flex none. Now I'm going to create a library just to give some existing tweets to make it look more realistic. Okay, so I added a dictionary called following, and I just put an src, name, and handle of whoever tweeted it, the time that's passed since they tweeted it, and the tweet itself, as well as how many comments, retweets, and likes. And I just made all of this up. Again, I named it following. So let's go back up, and I'm going to say v4 follow in following. Then this src is going to be follow.src, and we can move on to the actual content of the tweet. All right, so let's add another div for this actual content area. And we can go ahead and say width full. Now within that, we'll create another div, which is going to contain the name of the person, their Twitter handle, how long ago they tweeted, and it's going to have a caret drop-down icon. So let's say flex items center with full. Within this, we're going to have 3 p tags and an icon. This first one will just be follow.name. Let's say text semi-bold. Or that should be font semi-bold. Underneath that, we will do follow.handle. Let's take away the bold, and we're going to say text small, text dark, margin left 2. Now we're going to copy that, and with the exact same styling, we're just going to switch follow.handle to follow.time. Then lastly, we need to add our icon, which is just a caret down. So I'm pasting that icon in. I'm going to say text dark and margin left auto. So outside of the div containing the name, handle, and time, let's create a p tag, and this is going to have the actual tweet. So within it, we will just say follow.tweet. And then below that, we'll have another div, which is going to have the icons and how many likes, comments, shares they've had. So I'm going to flex this div. I'll say items center and justify between. And then we've got to specify that the width is full. So now within this, we're going to have 4 different divs. And all of them are going to be flexed and item center. So within these divs that are flexed item center, we're going to have an icon and a p tag. So on the div, I'm going to say text small, text dark. Okay, so for the icon, I'm just going to say margin right 3. And at the p tag, we can say follow.comments. And now I'm going to get my icons. Okay, so this div has the icon for the comments and how many comments that tweet has. I'm going to copy this and paste it 3 more times. So we're going to change the icon for each of these. This next one is going to be retweets. This one is going to be likes. And this one is not going to have a p tag with the icon. And just to correct myself, I said likes, but it's actually just like. So now let's fill in all the correct icons. Okay, so I've put all of the correct icons in with their following p tags. The last thing I want to do is go up to where we have the actual tweet, and let's say padding bottom, let's say padding Y2. So now let's take a look, and it looks really good. So now that we've got some filler tweets in, let's add functionalities so we can make a tweet. And when we click this, it shows down here. So if we go down to our script, the first thing I'm going to do is make a dictionary that any tweet we make is going to be logged to, and we're going to display this dictionary. So I'm going to call it tweets. And within tweets, we'll just have content. And I'll go ahead and add a tweet to start off. Let's say, it is so nice outside. And then we're going to have to model our text area and then create a method that pushes whatever we type in the text area into this tweets dictionary when we click tweet. So I'm going to just create an empty string for content within tweet. And this is what we're going to model our text area to. And then we need to make a method to push this into our dictionary on submit. So let's go down here and say methods. Let's call it add new tweet. Then we'll say let new tweet equal content this.tweet.content. Then this.tweets plural dot push new tweet. And we'll save that. Then let's go up to our form. And we're going to say v on submit.prevent. We're going to call our function add new tweet. Then the text area, we're going to say vmodel tweet.content. Then let's go down to this button and we'll just say type equals submit. And lastly, let's go to our tweet template that we made for ourselves. And we'll say v4 tweet in tweets. Tweet in tweets. And this tweet area we left blank. Let's say tweet.content. So now let's check if that works. We can see the tweet we already had in our dictionary, so that's a good sign. Did it work? Tweet. And you can see it worked. I hope you enjoyed learning how to recreate the Twitter homepage using Vue and Tailwind. It's a great little project to do if you want to get familiar with either of the frameworks. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you next time.